Welcome back to Mr. Orr's Flip Classroom for Grammar. Today's sentence pattern 3. Your topics are explanatory statements and colons. Your essential question is, how can I use colons, as in the piece of punctuation, to create compound sentences that explain my ideas to my audience? As before, you have your notes with blanks to fill in. You have your formula. Today, you have a comment on how to tie patterns 1, 2, and 3 together, basically to see how they connect, how they're similar and different. You have more examples. You complete someone else's sentences, then you craft 3 examples of your own using this pattern. Let's go ahead and start with the slides. Sentence pattern 3 is described as the compound sentence with an explanatory statement. So again, we have 2 sentences, independent clauses, joined together with punctuation, but the relationship between those 2 statements is different than what we've been doing in the past. A colon, that's where it's 2 periods stacked vertically, used to introduce a complex list or series. So before you have a complicated list, a complex list, again, we mentioned before in pattern 1, is a list that has commas and semicolons. A series is also a group of things in a row. A list might be individual words, ideas, parts of speech. A series might be phrases or even clauses in a row. A colon can also be used to lead into a block or extended quotation. We don't use this much early in our writing process because block quotations, by most definitions, are quotations that are 40 words or more. They are punctuated differently and they are indented differently as well. So in all probability, you have not used one of these yet. A colon can also be used to connect 2 independent clauses in a compound sentence. And in this case, oftentimes we use a colon to almost like it's an abbreviated equal sign. If you think about the 2 dots stacked vertically, if you extend both of those lines out to the right, they would be parallel and they would create an equal sign. So in some sense, when we use an explanatory statement, it's a way of saying that the first statement equals the second, although it's going to be a little more precise. And that's what we mean by an explanatory statement. An explanatory statement is a clause in which a word or phrase requires explanation or an example to be clear or complete. So we're going to give more detail to something compared to what we had before. Let's take a look at this in a little more detail. So when we compare sentence pattern 3 to other sentence patterns, sentence pattern 3 is similar to sentence pattern 1, where we use compound sentences with semicolons. But pattern 3 is the colon instead of a semicolon to combine related independent clauses into one sentence. So one similarity is that it uses punctuation to separate 2 independent clauses. And notice it does not require any kind of conjunctive connecting word or conjunctive adverb. The more precisely, the difference between pattern 3 is that the first sentence is an explanatory statement, meaning it's got something that requires explanation, while the second sentence is a specific statement or example which explains the first. So it goes into more detail. It gives explanation. So the formula can be described as a general statement, colon, specific statement. Notice once again we have a lowercase letter to start the specific statement because it's considered one sentence with one end mark, the period at the end. But it's general first, something that requires explanation or detail or example, and then a specific statement follows, but it goes together. Some examples of these types of statements are pattern 3. My sister has always wanted to travel, colon, going to Europe, comma, for her, comma, is a dream come true. My sister always wanted to travel. That's a very general statement. And for a lot of writers, that's where their writing stops. However, if we keep going, we give more detail and explanation of that. Going to Europe for her is a dream come true. So not just traveling in general, now it gives more detail about Europe and how important traveling to Europe is for her. Watch out, colon, there are many strange happenings afoot tonight. Watch out. Watch is actually a verb, and the implied subject is used, so watch out technically counts as a complete sentence. What are you supposed to watch out for? There are many strange things happening afoot tonight. There's things going on tonight. So watch out for what? Strange things tonight. Mr. Mraz taught me so many lessons, colon, to make the most of every opportunity is the most important. So Mr. Mraz taught me so many lessons. That's one general statement. We wonder what's one lesson you learned. colon, lowercase letter, to make the most of every opportunity is the most important. So that's a more specific example of one lesson that I learned. The key piece is going to be, just like with semicolons, you have to have a complete sentence, subject and a verb, in a complete independent clause after you have the colon or semicolon from pattern 1. If you have a colon and you don't have a complete sentence, you can't do it unless you have a list. And again, we'll go down the road of how to use a colon for a list later on. Today, I just want you to focus on specifically having a general statement, colon, and a specific statement which explains the first one, but those statements have to be complete sentences. So patterns 1, 2, and 3, tying them all together. Why are these 3 grouped together, for example, in your study? Well, all 3 patterns create compound sentences. They combine 2 or more independent clauses. Which one, pattern 1, 2, or 3 you use depends entirely upon the relationship between the words and ideas in those clauses. So how you decide which pattern to use depends on how those 2 sets of ideas are closely related. Pattern 1, both sentences are closely related by idea or content. Pattern 1 is the loosest of the 3. So if it's just some kind of connection, in fact, most cases, I recommend you fix a comma splice by simply taking that comma, adding a dot over the top of that comma, making it a semicolon, because your intuition told you these 2 sentences go together. In fact, in your brain, they were so closely tied, you thought they were one sentence. If you have a comma splice, the best fix in general is just put a semicolon where the comma is between the 2 sentences, and that's your fix. Until you get more confident, that's your best choice, because you may not be able to describe or explain at first how those 2 sentences are related. Pattern 2, you only use if the 2 sentences have words repeated from the first to the second. In pattern 2, you delete those repeated words to avoid repetition while communicating the information implicitly. So you're implying that the words are repeated by using the comma, by hitting the pause button. Again, the comma causes the reader to pause as they read. And then the sentences keep going, finishing the second thought, the parallel thought. If you don't repeat words, especially the verb, and the structure, the order of the words isn't the same in a sentence, then you can't use pattern 2. Only use pattern 2 if the sentences follow the exact same sequence of words and the verb is repeated. Pattern 3. The second sentence adds specific, helpful information that is lacking in the first. So you only use pattern 3 if the second sentence literally clarifies the first sentence. If it doesn't do that, if it's not that kind of relationship, you're better off using pattern 1 with the semicolon. Yes, you can still use comma fanboys, but I want you to really encourage you to use semicolons and colons more often because they're new, and you can be coached up on how to use them more effectively and become more confident in using them as you go forward. Let's take a look at the practice and the examples. So some additional examples here for your notes. So Darwin's The Origin of Species forcibly states a harsh truth: only the fittest survive. I made one error here in doing this. So since everything's italicized, let's underline the title of the book. Only the fittest survive. So forcibly states a harsh truth. What is that truth? We don't know what that truth is. So colon, only the fittest survive. We better make that lowercase as well. So first sentence is general, second sentence clarifies it or gives an example of it. Again, these are examples not of 1, 2, and 3. These are just examples of 3. Second example, the empty coffin in the center of the crypt had a single horrifying meaning, colon. We wonder, what was that horrifying meaning? What did it represent? Dracula had left his tomb to stalk the village streets in search of fresh blood. So what was that horrifying meaning? Has to do with Dracula. We have a capital letter here because it's a proper noun. Remember Yogi Berra's advice: it ain't over till it's over. So Yogi Berra, if you don't know, was a very famous baseball player, particularly for the New York Yankees, and he was famous for his quotes that were kind of confusing at times and sometimes really represented some wisdom. There's a lot of quotes you can find for Yogi Berra. And yes, if you ever heard of Yogi Bear, the cartoon character, he was named after Yogi Berra, the baseball player. Remember Yogi Berra's advice. What advice are we supposed to remember? It ain't over till it's over. This is one where it's capitalized in part because you could argue that it should be put in quotation marks. If you didn't use quotation marks, you would put lowercase I on it. But what is the advice in it over till it's over? That's the second sentence. It clarifies the first. Okay, completing someone else's sentences. Got several typos here. I apologize for that. Number one, you have to create the general statement followed by specific statement. Students all got A's on their papers. This is, again, finishing someone else's sentence is a hard thing to do. It's sometimes easier to make up your own. But I want you to get the idea, okay, what kind of statement would come first before a specific statement? The students all got A's on their papers. What would that be an example of, or what would it clarify? 2, the .com companies have changed the work week, colon, followed by what specific statement would you give? What's one way they would have changed the work week? 3, I finally know how to program my VCR or DVR, to be more precise. And what way you would clarify or give an example of that? And numbers 4 and 5, the same thing. Go ahead and offer up some kind of explanation. If it's after the colon or if it's before the colon, what is the general statement which might lead to it? You need to give 3 examples of your own sentences, all using sentence pattern 3. There's no variations for sentence pattern 3, but it's still challenging enough. Let your teacher know if you have questions. Otherwise, work with your breakout room teams and let me know how I can help. Submit your work when you are all done with all 3 patterns. For review, you may be asked to revise 1 or more of your sentences in order to demonstrate you've mastered these skills. Go to it.